שירה לכבוד התורה, השורר שירה לכבוד התורה, מפאת זכרה, זכה וברה, זכה וברה, מפאת זכרה, זכה וברה, זכה וברה.
Tobias will offer his Devar Torah in Yiddish. Tobias is in a Yiddish intensive, so we're hoping for a Yiddish Devar Torah.
In part. So in Yiddish, a shtot is a city, but a shtetl is a village, and a shtetla is a little beloved village. A lamp is a lamp, a lempel is a little lamp, but a lempela is a beloved little lamp. And likewise, Avram is our patriarch Abraham, but Avramel might be a young man who lives next door, and Avremela is your beloved little brother. As Felicia mentioned, I'm studying at YIVO's Yiddish Zoomer program, their summer program this summer. And among the many joys of doing so is exploring the Yiddish roots of my own family. Among them were singers and poets, farmers and peddlers, secularists and Bundists, and I'm also told somewhere way back on the family tree, on some branch, there sits a rabbi as well. But at the moment, I've been drawn into the poetry of my great-aunt, Mindy Rinkovich. Born in the late 20s, she's a native New Yorker, but also a native Yiddishist who lives to this day in the city. And Mindy mourns the loss of an old way of life in a dual language poem that explores this opening linguistics lesson in diminutives. The poem is entitled Zalman und Chani haben Chasana. Zalman and Chani get married. Abridged, the poem reads, Zalman and Chani under the chuppah, on a freezing wet, goes right through you to the bone January night, entirely worthy of a Polish winter. But it isn't. It's Brooklyn, USA. Just as surely as she's not Chanala, but Chani. Just as surely as I'm not Mindala, but Mindy. Funny that Yiddish, somehow inexplicably around, hanging in there, subsisting on love and memories, should linger, but tend to lose its great diminutives, a major charm, surrendering its ele to e. Now all those Srolis, Hindis, Moishis, Tzipis, with that English language diminutive, that replacement, my private metaphor for the irreplaceable, for that which is gone forever. I mourn the diminishing diminutives. I mourn the miniature details, gone forever from town and country. Of course, the mourning in this poem, partially a product of simply American assimilation, was primarily caused by the Holocaust. The destruction of shtetls and yeshivas, synagogues and Yiddish theaters, and millions of Yiddish neshamas, Jewish souls. But in this poem, Mindy instructs us to mourn the miniature, for destruction tears down the little ways of life along with the great. So we mourn the loss of Yiddish language idiosyncrasies that were simply mother tongue, Mama Lushan, to many of our ancestors. We also mourn the countless smaller losses, a shaded corner in the Jewish quarter where lovers once courted, a local tradition that never quite made it into the prayer book or the halakha, and a young girl's journal that, unlike Anne Frank's, never managed to make it out of her attic. In Yiddish, the name for the Holocaust is Churban Europa. Churban, or said with our modern Hebrew pronunciation, Churban, is the same word that we use for the temple's destruction, commemorated this evening. Churban Beis Hamikdash, Churban Beit Hamikdash, the destruction of the Jerusalem temple. We tumble soon into Tisha B'av, stumble through sadness, fight through our fast as we dwell in discomfort. And yet with thousands of years between us and them, between us and then, mourning for an ancient reality can be difficult to achieve, even within the ritual framework that's provided on the calendar. 3 weeks leading towards Tisha B'av, 9 days since the Hebrew month of Av began, and even this Shabbat, known as Shabbat Chazon, Shabbat of Prophecy, for our reading of Isaiah's doomful words. Nevertheless, still mourning the destruction or even praying for its rebuilding is not an easy task. It might be hard to relate to sacrificial proceedings, priestly hierarchies that conducted the rituals, and the obviously pre-modern sensibilities of Israelite society. But I suggest that we can take a page out of Mindy's book, or better said, a line from her poem, and perhaps we can mourn the miniature. Mourn the littler losses from the Churban of our spiritual ancestors' Israelite world. On a festival day, the ancient Israelite would have been jubilant for the rare occasion to eat just a bite of meat from the Korban sacrifice, to hear the primitive twang of a single Levite's harp, and to listen to a poetic prophet try out his newest words to God. We can imagine an Israelite family leaving their humble home in the hills and walking step after weary step to get to Jerusalem. Along the way, a mother surely offered her child what were then commonplace Hebrew terms of endearment, tiny, tender details, of which too few have been preserved in our Torah and Scripture. When we do open our Torah in a moment, we will begin the fifth and final book, Devarim, Deuteronomy, and hear less about the struggle in miniature of a family, but more so the strivings of a nation that's not yet fully established, still on the other side of the Jordan and about to lose its leader, Moshe. As Moses recounts the 40-year journey to the assembled people, he states, V'nisa mechorev, we set out from Chorev, from Sinai, V'nelech et kol hamidbar hagadol v'hanora, and traveled the great and awesome wilderness. I was struck by this language, hagadol v'hanora, which we are accustomed to hearing about God in our own prayers. But instead it is applied here to the great and daunting wilderness, which stands between slavery and sovereignty, between a society destroyed and one rebuilt, between the lost generations of yore and the coming generations that will build anew. Of course, a great and terrible desert, in our mythic past or in our troubled present, cannot be crossed in just a single mighty leap, but rather with thousands and thousands and thousands of sandy, blistered, tired steps, of parents that struggle to guide their children through the wilderness that surrounds us. And when the Israelites finally do make it into the promised land, they won't build up their kingdom, their temple, their culture in a flashy moment with a slogan or a gaudy gesture. Likewise, we today will not build virtuous nations through cheap trickery on the international stage, as we saw in Helsinki, or the chilling declaration of Jewish superiority that we saw this week in the Israeli parliament. We've always known that it's much easier to destroy than to build. And if we're going to build a better future, a better country or culture, synagogue, or even a better self, we can only do so through the elevation of countless miniature details. A million little deeds, steps taken, and mitzvot enacted, caring acts and truthful words that we can harness together towards our mythic ideals and our finest ideas. As I mentioned earlier, this Shabbat gets its appellation, Shabbat Chazon, Shabbat of Prophecy, from the Haftarah. Isaiah warned us about all the corruptions that are happening on the margins of society and how those lead to an ever greater destruction. It's a very bleak passage, but Isaiah does provide a moment of hope towards the chapter's end. Ve'ashiva shoftayich kavarishona ve'yotzayich kavat chila. God will return righteous judges and wise counselors to leadership, as it used to be. Achreichen yikarelach ir hatzedek, kirya ne'emana. And after that, Zion will be called City of Righteousness, Faithful City. To his words, I would add that our cities and nations will only become ones of righteousness and faithfulness when we, each of us, have taken all the incremental steps to build anew. When even the very way that we address each other shows the care and compassion of Yiddish's darling diminutive, of Remele, Mindele, Chanele. Good Shabbos.
יישר כוח.